Okay, so now we have Adrian Zumbrunnen, who I believe is working on Google Lens at the moment. Cool, and is very well known for conversational UIs. And I had a look at Adrian's website, where it's a conversational way of engaging you when you first arrive. It's really clever. It works really well. I tried to recreate that myself, and it wasn't very good. It was shit, in fact. And so I sort of went with the shit theme because it was so badly implemented. And my chatbot is called Chatbot. And what happens is you try and ask the bot questions, and the more questions you ask it, the more aggravated it gets because it needs to go to the toilet. So if you're able to distract it for long enough, eventually the bot says, look, I can't answer that question, but I have shat myself. So if you want to have a look at that, if you've got time to waste, then that's on my GitHub account. But let's actually talk about how to do this properly and not in a vulgar and pointless way. So Adrian's going to talk about the technical and social challenges of conversational design. And thank you very much. A big hand for Adrian, please.
Thank you very much for that great and memorable intro. So hello everyone. Today we are going to talk about conversational interfaces. But before we get there, I'd actually like to take a step back and spend some time talking about how this whole thing started for me. So 2016 was a crazy year. It was a year when everyone was talking about conversational UI, to the point where I actually started to become a little bit scared about the future of the way I would work as a designer. How will I personally fit into this future of artificial intelligence and conversational interfaces? So one day I woke up and asked this question on LinkedIn. What's your plan after chatbots take over and designers are no longer needed? And obviously that was a bit of an ironic question, right? But Rafael Liederitz, who's a product director at Google, had a pretty straightforward response. So now he was joking, hopefully. Actually, he is a really nice guy, just for the record. But I still think he had a point, right? Because that's basically, whenever people make jokes, you know that deep down there's a truth in it. Yes. So rather than being scared, I just decided to venture out and figure out how to do this. And I turned my website into a chat. And this is more or less how it looks like. And so let me just walk you through this real quick. So when you go to the website, it basically looks like this and says, scroll down if you don't feel like talking. So if you don't scroll, my website starts talking to you. And it will say something like, hi there, I'm Adrian, I live in Zurich, want to know more, or you want to get in touch. Then notice how you have like those two suggestions at the bottom. I'll quickly introduce myself. In this case, we tap on Tell Me More. And you see how the suggestion basically becomes part of the conversation. And I'll talk about the importance of that interaction a little bit later. But in short, you can have a chat on my website, an ongoing conversation. And when I launched this, it was really just an experiment, but the response was quite fascinating. I received over 300 emails within the first 24 hours. Magazines and various blogs picked it up. And so today, I want to share some of the essentials that I learned during this experiment. And there are 5 of them. So let's start with the most fundamental of all, and that starts with the why. So why does conversational UI matter in the first place? So as of today, we have 1.5 million apps in the App Store. Now, that's a lot of apps, right? So let me just ask you real quick, who here downloaded an app last week? Okay. How about today? Okay, how about tomorrow evening? It's a weird question, right? Yeah, because we don't plan our evenings saying, tonight I'm going to download an app, and you know what? It's going to be amazing, right? So we don't do that. So hard fact, downloading apps is not a hobby, right? And yet, if you think about it, that's still the mentality many of us, I feel, have when it comes to product development or design in general. So let's look at this app here. Let's look at this old ad for an instance here. That this is like one of the first Apple ads for the iPhone.
What's great about the iPhone is that if you want to check snow conditions on the mountain, there's an app for that. If you want to check how many calories are in your lunch, there's an app for that. And if you want to check where exactly you parked the car, there's even an app for that. Yep, there's an app for just about anything, only on the iPhone.
Beautiful. There's an app for that. So it seems like the app is the cure for everything. It's like the question, it's like the answer to life's problems and challenges. But like for every app, there's also oftentimes there's a username and a password. You don't remember your password? Well, you're in luck because there are apps for that too. And there's a new interface. Every single time we download an app, there's a new interface we have to learn. And people get really attached to those interfaces. There are people in this world, people with families and kids, who actually enjoy using interfaces like this. It's quite remarkable how good we're adapting to shitty products, right? But there's like something interesting that happens because actually people are really good in adapting to this. So at some point they will just call themselves professionals because now they know how to use that. So life seems great until updates come along. And we all love updates, right? All of a sudden, the blue button is gone. Now everything is black and white, no more shadows, it's just flat. So how do people react to this? Guardian's new design, or how to alienate users and lose your lost readers, right? So like these comments, they are really hard to digest. If you work on any like client's project, no matter how good your work is, oftentimes you spend hours, you spend weeks, you spend months working on a project, and all you get is comments like this. It can be harsh, right? And then we have other things like not enough space. Please delete apps or photos to install new apps. It's amazing. So people feel this pain, just like Mike Murphy here on Twitter. Why does my pasta need an app? I hate 2017. And that also reflects in statistics, right? So the average users download less than one app a month. And in fact, it's a bit more than zero, but we don't want to make this more dramatic than it already is. But just for the record, you have to be damn good to be that one app that people actually want to use, right? The other thing is that users spend 80% of their time in just free apps, and most of these apps happen to be messaging and social apps. And in fact, the end of 2015 was a really interesting moment where messaging took over social media. And many people considered this to be the biggest evolution in internet culture since the beginning of social media itself. But the problem isn't just apps, it's fragmentation. So imagine that you're at the football stadium and it's kind of like a progressive football stadium with QR codes on every back seat, and you want to order a hot dog, right? So how would that work? So you probably have to download a QR app. So you want to scan, but you notice that you don't have a QR scanner yet, right? So you want to go download it, but you don't just want to download any QR scanner, you want to actually have the best one. So you download it, and then you want to scan it, but first you need to give the camera permission to scan the thing. And then you're taken to a website, and you're ready to start until you get a pop-up that asks you to subscribe to their newsletter about hot dogs. And then you decide you're not interested in hot dogs. So you continue, and then the next thing you have to do is you have to figure out the hamburger menu, because all of a sudden, we know all the designers who try to recreate really interesting navigation models that confuse people for the sake of being remarkable. Yes, good luck figuring it out. And then you have to create an account. But then you notice that your password must contain an uppercase letter, a number, a haiku, a gang sign, a hieroglyph, and the blood of a virgin. So you get around that, you get a confirmation email, and you go back to the website, your account is now created, and at this point you can almost feel and taste the hot dog, only to realize that there's still a bunch of other steps involved. So let's look at how this could work in the future. So in the future you could say something like, I'm hungry. And then a bot that's close to you and that can deliver on this intent would say, sure, what do you want? Now, obviously this is simplified, right? But it's remarkable how much faster it is and how much easier it is. So what makes the conversational model here so usable? Well, first of all, we have a thread. So basically, all the conversation that is happening in one single place. All your transactions, all your history is associated with every single account or third party that you're dealing with, which makes it really easy to track your conversations. The other thing is that it's very lightweight. No more apps that you download once, for instance, airline apps. I've downloaded so many airline apps that I just download once to get the boarding pass, and then it just lingers around on my phone, but I actually never use it again. So we're really very much on the verge of moving to a value-first principle, where conversations can get you the value of a service right away without the need to create an account, without the need to download an app. The other thing is that there's less learning involved, right? So conversation is something that people are generally quite good at. Not everyone, but most of us. And what's interesting when we run user studies, we usually always say the first thing we tell users is, hey, we're not testing you, we're testing the interface, right? But when you're testing conversational products, you don't have to do that, because people are perfectly aware about how to express their needs and how to express themselves. It has worked pretty well for their whole entire life so far. The other thing is no sign-up. So a while back, I remember how blogs all around the world said that notifications are the new interface. But I think it's fair to say that conversation could be that thing. So, as Ted Livingston said, chat apps will be the new browsers, bots will be the new websites. This is the beginning of a new internet. He is really very able to put things in a very succinct way. It's very nice. All right. So let's talk specifics. Let's talk about writing. So whenever I start a new project, I like to write down a couple of lines or thoughts about it. So the first thing I did when I started this was I opened Writer, and I started writing a rough outline of how this experience should work. And I created a concept of so-called conversation paths. And basically, those were just answers that could trigger another set of answers, including suggestions, so that you can actually model the basic principle of a conversational tree. And this allowed me to model most conversations I wanted, but I was surprised. At first, I thought that design and code is going to take like the lion's share of time when it comes to this experiment. But as it turned out, that writing took more time than design and development combined, at least in the beginning. And the more I digged into it, the more I realized that there are so many similarities with traditional information architecture. So I needed to understand the structure of what I wanted to convey. And in order to do that, I needed to understand my goal. Now, my goal was actually pretty simple. I just wanted to create a website that talks to users, understands their needs more or less, and gives them the information they need. Sounds really easy, was actually quite harder than I initially expected. So first I thought about what could be potential user needs. So maybe they want to work together. Maybe they just want to get in touch. Maybe they want to ask a question. Maybe they just want to explore or read an article, something I wrote in the past, or check out my work or portfolio. And the more I thought about it, the more I realized that I can pretty much boil it down to these two entry points, which is exactly what I did. So notice at the bottom that you have those two entry points. And if you now tap on Get in Touch, for instance, it basically creates the follow-up conversation. And so this whole experience is pretty much based on this principle, right? And then you can have an ongoing conversation. But I also needed a free speech input at some point. But I want to get to this a bit later. So the important part here was that I needed to use suggestions, right? Suggestions are like a concept that has found wide adoption in conversational interfaces like major companies like Google, Facebook, even I think even Quartz actually started using suggestions with the very first conversational news interface. So suggestions are particularly powerful for many reasons. First, they do a really great job at setting expectations. What is this bot capable of? What can it do? The other thing is that it should move forward. Well-crafted suggestions always try to move the conversations forward so that people are not stuck in a loop. The other one is that they're natural. Now, if you think about user interfaces, oftentimes you have a lot of buttons that are not contextual to what the user actually wants to do right now. But suggestions evolve just like the conversation. So they feel incredibly natural because they're always relevant to the discussion that you're having right now. But that also means that they need to be anticipatory, meaning that you have to anticipate what users might probably want to know next. You know your situation when you have a fight with a neighbor and you wish you could travel back in time and say the super nice thing that will make you come across as the smart one? That's exactly what you can do here, because you can basically anticipate, you can create the whole conversational outcome. And it's surprising how well that actually works. And that also creates great potential for delight. So great writing and user understanding is really the essence of conversational design, because it also ensures that you're not just approaching it from a technical angle, but from a social one as well. All right. So let's talk about context. Now, context means so many things that sometimes it feels like it could mean nothing at all. Context is like the force. It surrounds us. It's in this room, it's on your phones, it's on your watches. Can you feel it? Even the temperature here is context. So does context affect our conversations? Absolutely yes. Imagine you're going to a fancy conference and there's a really nice cocktail party in the evening. So, and you know, most people there are designers or front-end engineers. So would that affect the way you start a conversation with a stranger? For most people, it definitely would. I mean, if you want to talk to developers, you just say, hey, anyone tried the new React? And voila, you made yourself some new friends. So I wondered, how can I apply this concept to my experience? So I occasionally write articles on Medium, and those articles are pretty much all about design. So when people come to my website from Medium, I know that they're probably interested in design. So what happens now, if there's a link out to my website, it will not just say hi, it will not just say the same thing it usually says, it will actually say something that's more contextual to where you came from. And so this doesn't just allow for more contextual conversations that feel more natural, but it also allows you to build some great Easter eggs. Because what I really wanted to find out is this. Would users appreciate getting UX news in a conversational way? So there was kind of like this loop here. So if you get into that context and you say, are you in the UX field too? And then you say yes. Then it's well say, cool, I just added you to my secret group of people. We will talk about design links here every day. Come back and we'll chat about the latest things that are going on in design. And so I asked people at the end of the flow, when you actually finish the flow, it asks you, hey, do you want to share some links about design? Do you feel like there's something interesting that we should discuss on the website? And I received over 100 links per week on average. And so I took this as a clear signal that people want to get updates like in a conversational way. But no one likes to get updates, UX updates from a guy. But with an animal, a bear, a symbol, could be a different story. And that's what led to the creation of the UX Bear. Now, the UX Bear is basically a collaboration with UX Design CC, and it invites like various people in the industry, like Vitaly Friedman, who is here, I think, today, Luke Wroblewski, Nir Eyal, and others who joined the conversation. And the way it works is basically similar to the website I just shown you. So when you go to the website, it's basically a social animal. Unlike my website, this chat can invite other people. So in this case, it's talking to Oliver Reichenstein, and it's talking about icons. So when you now tap on the suggestion, it will say, all right, Oliver, nice to have you here. And then Oliver comes in. And we'll talk about some of this stuff. And then basically there are like different breakpoints, like different points where you can interact as well. Now, as you can imagine, this was a huge challenge from a content point, like from a content creation point of view. Initially, I modeled everything with JSON, but that turned out to be a nightmare if you wanted to have collaborators on your team. So I ended up creating like a content management system for conversational interfaces, because if content creation isn't right, the conversation won't delight. So that's what I did, but I feel like we're running out of time. So if I have enough time, I might give a little short live demo of that interface. So the takeaway here is that we really need to think about context when it comes to conversations. And context is so many things. It could be the history. What is the previous things that the client, what are the previous conversations that the client had with my chatbot? Where is the user? What's the location? Can you use system preferences or user preferences to your advantage, like to make the experience feel more personalized? And on which platform is the conversation actually happening? There are many like bot syndication platforms that allow you to create one bot and then syndicate it to a lot of different platforms. But the problem with these is that it's very great for the person who creates it, but for the user, they might have completely different needs depending on which platform they are. Even the language, like subtle cues in the language might even be different. So we need to think about that. So the other thing is time. Now, I feel like time is the single most underappreciated element in design. Time is so subtle and elusive that it's hard to understand how it shapes the experiences we create. So let's look at an example. Imagine you met a person you really like and you want to send something like this. Hey Anna, it's really nice to meet you, Bob. So, very creative. When should you send this message now? Should you send it immediately or should you wait a little bit? Now, which type of response would you appreciate the most, right? Now, the immediate message would definitely make you happy, but the delayed message triggers a far more powerful positive response. It adds anticipation to the conversation. And that's what I refer to as conversational momentum. Like, we have to think of conversation. There are like different phases that you go through in conversational design, and those shape the meaning of your words. Because faster might not always be better. So let's look at the instantaneous segment here for a second. If you get a response right away, sometimes there can be weird situations. For instance, I had a friend of mine worked at a help desk, and they had like an interface that would basically allow them to have like pre-populated answers. You know, like, so if the user's name is John, then it could say, hey John, how are you doing? How can I help you today? And so most people who work there would always press that button. And the reaction from the user point of view was that it felt like they were talking to a bot. So many ask, are you human? If the answers are too quick, it changes how people feel about this. So let's think of time as a mental white space. You know, like we use borders, we use like different treatments in visual design to make information hierarchy more clear. But in conversation, or even in like just conversational interfaces in general, time can actually make content more digestible. And that leads us to the dynamic delay phase, which is also really interesting. So think about typing indicators. Typing indicators make conversation feel much more alive. Now, imagine this scenario. You go back to Anna and you text her, hey Anna, should we go out tonight? And then she starts writing, so you see the dots. And then all of a sudden, the dots are gone. And then they come back, and she says, sure. So how sure is she really now, right? So what does that mean? So as you can see, like time really incorporates many of like psychological principles. Like it's a really subtle touch, but it can make the conversation feel so much more expressive. It can allow for great jokes. It can allow for a much more natural flow. So in short, time really can add rhythm to the experiences we create. So there are two more segments here, but that would probably be too complex for the time given. But I do want to talk about one other thing. So when we think about time in interaction design, we can use animation to represent time. Everything happens along a timeline. So what happens here is I basically created animations that would change depending on the length of the text, but also by like I used like the average US readings, like the reading speed of the average US reader, to make sure that things are not too fast. And the delay between the chat bubbles is also randomized to some extent. But the most critical animation of all was this one. So when you tap on a suggestion, it takes place within the conversation. That you can like literally see how your choice becomes part of this interaction. And I had actually this really crazy story happening to me when I lost my wallet on the lake in Zurich. And I just launched this experiment like 2 weeks before. And then someone wrote me an email and said, hey, by the way, I found your wallet. And that was just 1 hour after I lost the wallet. And I said, like, wow, that's technology working for me right there, you know. And so I replied, and we texted. We actually even called each other, and then we met up. And I asked him, hey, by the way, how did you get in touch with me? And then he just looked at me very confused and said, what do you mean? We had a chat, no? So that was quite fascinating. So the person literally thought that he was immediately having a real conversation with me on my website, something that I really have never considered that this could possibly happen. And so a lot of people ask me, which natural language understanding technology did you use to build this? And that, again, was really confusing because there's really not much natural language understanding going on here. But then it dawned on me. One of the things I started to understand is that the animation really contributed greatly to the way people felt about their answers. Since the animation becomes part of the conversation, people felt like, hey, this is actually what I said. The other thing that contributes to this feeling is if the suggestions are well written, if you have well anticipated the responses that people could possibly give, then it also makes the conversation much more fluid, and people don't mind that there is no free speech text field there. So time, animation, and pace can change interpretation. So let's talk about personality. So personality usually comes at the end of the design process. At first you want to get your basics right. With conversational interfaces, it's hard not to think about personality because conversation is inherently social. So when you use conversation as an interaction model, people automatically assume that there's some sort of social entity behind it. You probably have this moment too when your laptop is suddenly slowing down. You say, oh, for fuck's sake, what are you doing? Or you talk to your toaster. I talk to my toaster sometimes. And so this is like an effect that we basically see a social entity in most things we use on a daily basis. The other thing is, as soon as you add conversation to the mix, that signal, that bias, we could call it a bias probably, is like even stronger. It gets even stronger. And so that's really interesting because that also has an impact in how we design a persona. For instance, user studies have found that when you have two computers, one with a nice personality and the other one with an asshole personality, that people actually perceive the computer with the nice personality to be more performant than the other one. So that has deep implications to the way we design the persona for our conversational agents, for bots, right? But in my case, like you could fill an entire book and talk about the concept of personality. But I just wanted to highlight some of the things that I cared about to make the experience feel more personal. So for me, design always starts with the details. Yes. So for instance, when you refresh my website, one of the things that happens is that it will not say the same thing as when you access it for the first time. And what happened was that a lot of people who went to the website and then wanted to show it to someone, they picked their phone and they showed it to someone, and then they were surprised that it didn't say the same thing. And that was a magical moment for people. It's very easy to do, right? There's no denying that this is really, really easy to do. But it just goes to show how much this is a psychological endeavor, how many times like the perception shapes the reality of the user, right? So what happens here is like for the user, all of a sudden they thought, hey, there might be a little bit more intelligence here going on than I had initially anticipated. So what happens here is ciao. It says ciao. Sometimes it even talks in French. It changes a lot. The other thing is that like a bot can be opinionated. Now, if you're a company, that is probably a really tough problem. But one of the problems I had with the bot is that lots of people wanted to talk about sex. So they always went to my bot and they said, I'm not going to go into details here. But So what happened is, since this account, this bot was linked to my email address, you can imagine the amount of emails I got with really weird content in it. So I had to figure something out. So in my contact form, there's an embedded contact form experience. And what happened is I had to add email validation, right? So in this case, when someone says, let me know what's on your mind and we'll get in touch, And then the person says, conversational UI, and then it says, you suck. And then it will say, your email reminds me of the poop emoji. Something doesn't feel quite right here. Shall we try this again, right? So basically, the basic takeaway here is if people start messing around with your interface, you start messing around with people, right? You can't let people do that to your bot, right? There's certain pride you need to have when it comes to product development. And again, I actually think this is really interesting also because people like a little bit of friction. If things are just too smooth, if a bot never gives back shit, then it feels like, okay, this is boring, right? So you need to give people a little bit of friction, something that polarizes a little bit. The other thing was that I really wanted to follow this value first principle. Now, if you, a lot of websites, they don't really do a good job in asking the right questions at the right time. In a lot of cases, they want to know about your email, they want your name, they want so many things because before you can even start using the most basic parts of the product. Now imagine someone would do that in real life, a complete stranger. Hey, what's your name? What's your address? It would be really weird, right? It would show it's a clear signal of low social intuition. So I didn't want the UX bear to be this way. So in the UX bear example, actually what happens is, so the UX bear tells you about news, right? But some people might be a little grumpy, and they might not initially want to talk about design. So the UX bear tries to do some small talk, and it will share some news with the user here. So what happens here is if you say other topic, and I would say, by the way, before I forget, what should I call you? So imagine you're the user. The UX bear has talked about several topics of design with you, and the first question will not be what's your name, but along the way, it will ask these kinds of questions, and then it will also start addressing you by your name. And that creates that concept of building something together, like there is a relationship happening. And it also says here, if you now say, okay, this is working. My name is Adrian. Cool, I'll remember that. I feel like that's the start of a wonderful friendship. The other thing is inclusiveness. So a conversation should, at least from time to time, give people a way to express themselves. So what I was mentioning before was that the UX bear tries to lighten up the mood if it's talking to a grumpy person. In this case, it's saying, you don't really feel like talking, right? And then, but how about we make a deal? I tell you something about myself, and then you tell me something about yourself. And then in this example, the user picked cool. Right? And then the bear says, all right, did you know that my hair is actually not white? It just reflects the light. That's why it seems white. And then the user says, okay, that's interesting. All right, isn't that cool? And then, it says, now it's your turn. So people gave me a lot of different responses here. One of the users said, I'm a Democrat. That's great, as we heard this morning, right? I'm Jewish and appear white. I'm not sure how that works, but it's great. I was a graphic designer since '92. In 2013, I opened a pub, and since then, I'm very happy. That says a lot about our profession. My hair is white, too. So personality really becomes an integral part of your brand and your product. Now, if you look at my website is what many people would consider very Swiss. It doesn't have any images. It's black and white, mostly because I'm colorblind, so I always feel like that's a safe choice. So what happens is that this looks like a very dry experience, right? So the conversational interface on top of my website really helped me to draw to give people a more accurate depiction of myself. At least people can now get an idea of how it might potentially of how it might be to work with me. So we covered a few topics here today. We started why the conversational interfaces matter. We talked about writing, the importance of writing, how I've always thought that writing is one of the most important skills to have in our field. If you can write down an idea, if you can write down a concept, you really start to understand what it's all about before you actually open Sketch or just start doing something. The other thing is context, how context shapes the conversations we have. We talked about animation, how animation can literally change the way people feel about the conversation, and not just how it looks. And we eventually talked about personality, how we can give products and services a soul by adding personality to the conversations. So conversational UI is not just a technical problem, but a social one as well. Now, this is a conference. We can watch videos at home, but we can talk to each other here and move this field and this conversation forward together. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Adrian. That was really fun and really enlightening as well. And yeah, the whole thing about writing, hopefully through conversational UIs we'll get a more general appreciation for how important writing is, whether it's conversational or it's just a monologue or just some prose, and think more about content strategy and everything. So there's a couple of questions. The first one is, the person who found your wallet at the lake, was her name Anna?
No. No, but that would be a great story. It's a great question. Oh, I never thought about this. That would have been...
You wrote a bot which then found your wallet, which then would communicate with your other bot.
My friend Bob, you know, he's using the same website.
And the second question is, instead of the two bottom buttons, I guess like the two green buttons at the bottom of it, sometimes it's one, right? But what control would you use to input dates or present choices typically provided in a drop-down?
Yeah, so I think so that's also where it gets complex very quickly. So if you build this yourself, that probably doesn't actually make much sense, because you really want, like, one of the essential things that makes conversational interfaces so great is that you're talking to people where they already are, right? So instead of like creating an account on your website, you can use Facebook so that people can just reach out and get in touch with you very quickly. So in this case, you would have to build a lot of stuff just to make that funny little experiment, right? And so ideally what would happen is that Facebook or whatever chat platform you use have like standardized system components that allow you to make these inputs as frictionless as possible. Yes.
I think, yeah, it worked quite well with the inputs, but then when it becomes multiple choice, it becomes less less conversational and more Monkey Island or something like that. Is there anyone else who's not using the question app thing who would like to ask a question for Adrian? Oh, I've got one over here.
Hi. I was wondering about possible frameworks for free input. So if you have, for example, two sentences that are very similar or might mean similar things, what framework do you use or to kind of catch and lump them together to mean the same thing and get the same response in a conversational UI?
Yes. So I personally so there's like a second version of this that I haven't released yet that basically uses natural language understanding. And I used API AI as a backend for it. Now API AI is basically a conversational user experience platform that allows you to create natural language understanding bots. And the idea is, there's a concept of intent, and the way you described it is actually very accurate, that you have like an intent and that's triggered by different things, different ways that the user can actually say the same thing. But I still feel like this is a really tough problem to solve, because if language is very messy, it's very unstructured, right? And people write in very different ways. If you look at the way very young people write, they write in a completely different way than older people. And so this is a really tough challenge. It works quite well for simple interactions. It actually works surprisingly well. But as the sentences get longer, it becomes really hard, right? So for instance, if you think about a pizza or ordering an Uber. Let's take ordering an Uber as an example. So if you say, I need an Uber, then the next question would be, cool, where do you need to go? And then you would probably figure this out and you would have follow-on questions. But if the user says, I need an Uber to Flüelerstraße 10. So in this case, the user already gave you the address, so you can skip the questions right away. And so these concepts, they can all be built using any like bot building framework. That's pretty much the way it works across all the different platforms. The way those platforms work is always, most of the time, a little bit different, but essentially the concepts are the same. You have the intent, what you just described, and the responses. So I can definitely recommend checking out those platforms just to get an understanding how difficult it is to scale a bot that is more complex.
That's fascinating stuff. Oops, I'm going to have to try again, I think, now that I know more about actually how to make bots, and try not to deliberately screw it up. Okay, so thank you very much again, Adrian. It was really, really entertaining talk.